My point is,
hello everybody and welcome to Lincoln Arts Centre. My name is Ben and I'm the Creative and Exec Director here at the Arts Centre. And we're here today for the Big Reset panel discussion as part of the Creative Weekender, which has been produced by Lincolnshire One Venues. And I just wanted to take a moment before we kick off to thank Lincolnshire One Venues and the Lincolnshire One Venues project team, who have been absolutely instrumental in making the event happen across both today and tomorrow. Without them, we're a small team at the Arts Centre and they're also a small team, so together we're bigger than the sum of our parts, and without them it wouldn't have been possible. So thank you so much to Lincolnshire One Venues and the project team there. We're here because there's been a significant shifts in public funding and investment into Greater Lincolnshire over recently. We've had new leadership and new shifting visions for cultural organisations and a new energy around supporting independent artists in the development of a thriving ecology. So it's a genuinely exciting moment. And I think that whilst that is an exciting moment, in order to develop a thriving ecology, that's going to require graft, it's going to require work, it's going to require lots of individual people squirreling away to work collaboratively over the next few years. And I'm really conscious that when we do squirrel away and work really hard to develop our local ecology, that there's never the opportunity to stop and talk about that and make sure that everybody is involved in the conversation, that we leave nobody behind in that conversation. And so it's really important to us today to open a space where we can have a conversation between people that work in organisations, people that work in venues, people that work in the independent sector, everybody that makes our local cultural ecology tick. And so we wanted to make sure that happens, because this is the moment. We are the culture. So let's take a breath. We're here, this is it, we're going to make it happen. And so I wanted to make sure that we had a moment to have a conversation about that. I'm joined by a panel of exciting people, both from organisations and independent artists, who are going to provide a little bit of structure to the 90 minutes that we have. But I wanted to shift it much more into a discursive place, whereby you and people online are having a conversation with everybody in the room today. So whilst the panel are here, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a minute, we are wanting to make sure that everybody is having a conversation today. So please, feel free to contribute, feel free, be brave, contribute and talk. Your voices are welcome and they're heard. So Tanya, do you want to kick us off with just an introduction?
Okay. Hello everybody, my name's Tanya Akrofi. I'm a writer and oral storyteller living in Lincoln. I am a trustee for UK New Artists. I am the chair for St Hugh's Foundation for the Arts, as well as being a freelancer, and most proudly, my newest hat is that I'm one of the critical friends for the Lincoln Arts Centre. Nice to meet you all.
So many hats.
So many hats.
Thank you. Hi, nice to meet you all. I'm Matthew Archer from Magna Vita Trust for Leisure and Culture. So we operate out of East Lindsey, and one of the projects that I oversee is So Festival, which is an outdoor arts festival, which hopefully most of you have heard about, which happens on the east coast of Lincolnshire.
Hi, I'm Maisie. I'm an emerging artist, so I do props, graphic props, maybe a bit of puppetry making. And I'm sort of into graphics props at the moment, and I do a bit of performing as well. And I'm just here because I received a bursary from LOB, which has been monumental in my development of my career.
Hi, I'm James Trousdale. I'm Strategic Lead for Culture at North East Lincolnshire Council. What that means is I oversee various culture and heritage programmes, including Bloomsbury Creates, which was a cultural development fund initiative which has recently finished. I'm also a trustee for the St Hugh's Foundation for the Arts.
And critically, we're joined by all of you in the room and also online too. So we have quite a big online contingent joining us. We've got Kaylee somewhere in the room monitoring that online live stream to make sure that anybody that does comment and contribute, so please do feel free to comment in the live stream, and Kaylee will be your voice in the room. But before we go to everybody else, I just wanted to get some thoughts and reflections from our panel. And so we wanted to start by asking what each panel member felt most excited about, or maybe less excited and more about what they see as the crucial opportunities to seize over the next 3 years. I'm going to come to James first, because he was looking he looked away from me, and so I'm going to come to James first.
And the conversation we were just having a second ago, so if you sit at the end of a panel, what does that mean? Is that a good place or a bad place to sit? So, as you alluded to it, I think it's a really exciting time across Greater Lincolnshire. There's lots more Arts Council funding coming in, lots of money in terms of levelling up as well, and a whole host of different towns and across the city as well. So I think from my perspective, this is part advert, but hell, why not? 21st, 22nd of July, we're working with Magna Vitae. It's a project which has been in development and in delivery internationally over the last 5 years, but there's a massive international dance piece taking place on Freeman Street in Grimsby, Creative Europe programme. It's a €4 million gig, UK premiere, really exceptional quality stuff. And again, I think what many people in the outside world don't realise is this is a conversation, and it's been going on for 5 years. Obviously, we had a global pandemic in the middle of that as well. So again, that sort of scale, that sort of ambition, and showing really what the art is of the possible.
And what's made that possible, James? Just so that we all understand
what's made that possible. In part, the opportunity of Cultural Development Fund and us having resource to go into that.
Yeah.
Moreover, I think it's the development of international collaborations that Magna Vitae have been working on for many years. And again, I say this project's been in development for 5 years. There's another 5+ years of diplomacy and engagement and partnership working around that to make that possible. So again, I think this is probably testament to a lot of work that's happening across the county now. I think certainly in North East Lincolnshire, we've been doing a lot of kind of groundwork and building the foundations and making sure we've got that stable foundation to build on now. Mm-hmm. And I think now you can see in what's happening this weekend, what's happening, what other things we've learned about this morning as well, you can see those things really come into fruition. I think there was every part of kind of cultural development, creative development, call it what you will, requires that time, and I think there's an element of kind of catching up. Yeah. And I feel like we've caught up, yeah, almost, and there's a real moment of opportunity. That isn't to say we shouldn't try and push the bar even higher and create even more opportunities. So I think it's days like say these networks, these conversations, making sure we've got everything to enable really great stuff to happen. And we're in a much stronger place than we were previously.
So funding, partnership building,
absolutely,
communication, a little bit of diplomacy.
Absolutely.
But time also?
Yeah, time I think is absolutely critical, and making sure collectively we make the time to have those conversations to make sure that what is delivered is genuinely great quality. And again, there's a conversation it's all about what does quality mean. I'm ultimately a simple soul. People having a good and enjoyable time. I mean, we can go through all sorts of Arts Council matrices and how all these things are measured, but simply, are people having a good time and making sure that people have a great experience is about those conversations and making sure that everybody is coming together in the right way.
And I think that nature of that partnership building, the nature of partnership building to increase ambition is really important, and I want to touch on that a little bit later down the line, because I think that that's something that we just need to unlock and get into in order to be able to raise that ambition, and also to take time, and also to get that, what you speak of a little bit of, is like an alignment. It feels like that you have to kind of, sometimes you have to get that alignment, sometimes you have to force it, and sometimes it happens naturally. Great, okay, thank you very much. Does anybody else want to give us a thought on what they're looking forward to, or the opportunities as they see it? Yeah.
I would say, you spoke about the ecosystem of the cultural sector in Lincoln and in Greater Lincolnshire. And one of the things that I'm really happy to see is the amount of collaboration and the potential for supporting grassroots creative activity. So during the pandemic, we all leaned quite heavily on our creative talents and creativity to help us through in many different ways. And I think what's happened is that many people have discovered in themselves a love for creativity and creative activity that is going to continue. So while the focus might be on artistic development of professional or would-be professional creatives and artists, there is also the need to pay attention to those who are amateurs, doing it for the love of it, because they help to foster this ecology. They are very necessary at this time, and I think what I'm really enjoying is starting to see the connections being made with professionals and in professional development, but also with creativity in communities, and how we lend more support to those who are doing it as a part-time joy, and what place they can have in the future that we develop for the creative sector.
It's something that I started in August, and something that really became very evident to me was the strength of the amateur sector, the sort of community-based sector was so important on our doorstep in Lincoln in particular. It really feels like, every month we have a company in here that are doing it. They're often volunteers, they're doing it for the love of it, they're doing it because they get social benefits out of it. And they bring so much to the organisation.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Matthew?
I'll go. What am I most excited about? And I guess a bit like James, maybe it's that advert for what I'm doing myself, but it's more than that. So, Soap Festival has been something I've been involved in now since like 2009, and it's slowly kind of grown and developed, and a lot of it has been about those long-term relationships with Jens that's ultimately helped us get the EU funding bid and PPP into Grimsby, and it's kind of where it's our next steps that I'm excited about, and how we can take the rest of the cultural sector of Lincolnshire on that journey with us. So festivals happening 16th, 17th, 18th of June in Skegness and Mablethorpe. But over the last year, we've done a lot of thinking around kind of what our strategy is. How can we really learn and benefit from having Jens as a Danish artistic director who has been doing outdoor festivals for God knows how many years, and seems to know absolutely everybody in Europe. So I guess I'm excited about how we're going to develop. We're going to bring more international content to the area, but kind of partnering that up with we're not keeping it for ourselves. Like they both said, to me, what I'm also excited about is the energy that's in the sector right now, and how we can connect, chat and collaborate. And I think that's really what we're trying to do. So part of our programming this year, we've got 4 or 5 shows that are going across to Gainsborough. Gainsborough got a new festival happening on the 17th, and there's 4 or 5 international shows going over to Gainsborough, and that's completely new from them. Newark and Sherwood District Council, as part of Newark Creates, they've got 2 or 3 shows that are happening there. So we're trying to, I guess, develop and share our learnings, our contacts, our relationships with other communities. The Hub and NK was kind of part of it, but the dates didn't quite work out for programming, and hopefully they can come back. So I'm excited, I guess, to connect with the sector a lot more than we do, and share our learning, share our contacts, share any expertise that we want, because it's together that we've got to make a difference.
Yeah.
So,
And how do you think, just touching on that, how do you think that because you've obviously significantly advanced and expanded that work around working with the local sector and expanding that work, how do you think that, or in your opinion, what do you think has been the driver of that, or led to that level of success in that area? It's probably lots of things.
yeah, success. I think it's sitting down and having a plan. I think it's having an ambition to deliver quality, but also an ambition to connect to our community. So one of the threads through our application was actually our aim for the festival is how do we democratise how we're going to programme a festival? So, you know, we don't want an artistic director sat in a room who, like we've had in the past, who was sat there and just chosen the shows that and performances that happen at the festival. That's not how Jens works. For quite a few years they've been doing collaborative programming with other close by cities and towns, so that when they fly a performance in from Barcelona, actually it's going to 3 or 4 areas, but then sort of 3 or 4 areas are benefiting from it, they're developing, we know everything's about contacts and relationships and who we know, and it just develops so much. So I think it's having that plan, it was quality, wasn't it, was first, and then I think it's sort of having a plan and ambition and trying to stick to it and follow it really. We put a lot of effort into thinking about our new approach to the MPO, but we consulted with lots, you know, internally, externally. Ambition and connecting to our communities, I think, is probably the key to it.
Yeah, and I guess through that connecting to your communities is through a degree of transparency, but also connect to the plans, because in order to do that you have to outline like how early in advance you program, or you know, if you want to get people into the room to program with you, you need to be able to do workshops and things like that.
Yeah, and we're not perfect, and one of the things we did do last summer, so we took a group of typical people from Mablethorpe and Skegness to a number of go-sees around the UK, and they started to get involved in having an input into the programme that we programmed this year, and there's 2 or 3 of the shows that we was quite easily able to agree on, and that's happening. So that's really making them buy into the festival, act as ambassadors, connect to it, but getting them engaged into different arts and cultural activities, but as well as having those general health and well-being impacts as well that we know arts and culture does.
Yeah, and I think just touching on that thing where you say you're not perfect. I really, I do feel like there's a shift in that. There's a saying, you know, don't ever let the perfect get in the way of the good, and I think that there's a real. I feel like we're just a little bit braver to do that now. Where we go, we're not going to let the perfect get in the way of the good. We're going to be a little bit braver, and we know that through mistakes or you know, risk, that is when we learn most. And so I really, yeah, I hear that.
I like that. Yeah, I keep reminding the team not to let perfection get in the way of progress. So that's our little motto. Yeah.
Yeah, and I heard recently practice makes progress rather than perfect. Maisie.
I also have that motto of don't make it perfect, make it interesting, and I think that's really cool in like everything, like even choosing an outfit, like just everything. So in terms of what I'm excited about, it's more like a personal, independent perspective, but I would say it is the people in Lincolnshire. Like that's literally why I've sort of stuck around, because everyone is so like the opposite of gatekeepers. Everyone wants to help you and give you opportunities and tell you everything that they know, like in a creative way. And I've learned so much just from the people, and that's probably what I would say is most exciting. Like a day like today, networking, seeing all these familiar faces, it's so lovely.
That's great. So what we're hearing there is lots of optimism about how open and you know, how we drop down the drawbridge, lift up, drop down the ladder so that people can come up. So thinking about that, then let's just flip that. How, in terms of those opportunities, I'd like us just to touch on some of the barriers that we might have to overcome in order to achieve or capitalise on those opportunities. So it's less about sort of the negatives, but it's more about the barriers that we know we can and will and should overcome. And we'll only overcome them by recognising them and not denying them. The barrier is still there. If you deny it, we've got to get it out there and put a plan in to overcome it. So, I mean, before we do that, I'll just say that I'll have to give you some time to think about what those barriers might be. In terms of my take on the first question, which was the opportunity, I really feel like what we are slowly developing, and I think sometimes that's been quite organic, is this notion that we have developed quite distinctive, or we are becoming quite distinctive, as particularly around cultural organisations, but also, you know, artistic practices, and also Lincolnshire as an offer is becoming a little bit more distinctive. In particular reference to cultural organisations, I feel like the offer that we're all trying to develop is distinctive, and therefore that distinction enables better collaboration, because we're all bringing something individual to the table rather than kind of operating in the same space and bringing the same thing to the table. I'm really excited about that notion that we can be a bit more distinctive, because we can't be everything to everyone, because what you end up becoming is nothing to no one. And you know, through when we were doing the Future Arts Centre consultation as part of our revisioning of the Arts Centre, that became really apparent that we were really trying hard to be everything to everybody, and some people felt that we were nothing to no one. And I recognised that and chimed with that. And so in making our distinctive offer, which inevitably means that sometimes we have to go, actually this is our thing, and that we're not very good at that, and just being honest about that. Knowing that there are other people, cultural partners and collaborators who have strengths in other areas, that really brings something. And if we can focus on that and put our energies into that, then we can start to draw and attract funding in that area. So, you know, we can, as the Arts Centre, we can invest £250,000 a year in artist development for the next 3 years, every year, because artist development, we know, is all about work, it's through the sphere of talent development. Whereas other people have other areas of strength, like whether that be working internationally or collaborative festivals or whatever that be. So I think that element of distinctiveness is really chiming with me. Hopefully that's giving you enough time to think of some barriers.
Too busy listening to you.
Does anybody want to kick off with some barriers? And then we'll throw it out generally.
One thing that I think is becoming quite apparent is that as much as we're doing some really amazing work, and there are lots of different agencies involved in some truly interesting projects, there is something to be said about the lack of capacity. I don't know if it's that we haven't been used to, as a sector in this area, working at this level with so many new projects and so many interesting collaborations happening. But I worry about the toll it's taking on individuals who are running some of these agencies or creatives themselves. I worry about the lack of room to rest and to take a breath, as you said, because there is a lot happening and the momentum seems to be, quite fast.
Relentless.
Relentless, yes. And in many ways, that's a positive thing. That's wonderful, and it's really testament to the good work that's being done. So it's something to be incredibly proud of. But at the same time, is this a point at which we acknowledge that lack of capacity exists, so that we can put in the necessary steps to make sure we're taking care of each other, we're taking care of individuals who are running these agencies, and taking care of the artists who are part of this ecosystem? What can we do at this point before it gets out of hand, where people are doing more than they can manage, and the machine sadly has to come to a grinding halt? We don't want that to happen, so how do we at this point acknowledge that there's a lot happening and it's fantastic, but that it in many ways is taking a toll on the individuals who are responsible for keeping it going?
Yeah, and I think there's something about, with that capacity thing, is around a lack of cultural infrastructure as well, comparative to some of our neighbouring cities and counties, because it feels like we can invest X amount of money in talent development over the next 3 years, and it still will not satisfy the level of talent that lives within our grasp, within our cities, within our villages, within our towns. However, that's because when we do things like that, and when that infrastructure does come about, the demand for it is so increasing and so monumental that you, as the provider of that, there's a demand for it, right? And then therefore there's a pressure to keep up that level of stuff. And so it kind of, what happens is it falls onto the infrastructure that's there. And I think there's a lack of kind of recognition that that infrastructure is all about do and not about be. So we have to do all the time, and we can't just, there's no recognition of the be, the thing that we are here right now, and the beauty that brings. So, if I think about some of the fundraising targets that we have, we have to make £260,000 a year in addition to what we currently are operating on, which means that that's £260,000 worth more activity because you only get money for doing things, right? You don't get money for being things. And so that scares me, if I'm honest. That's like, I can't think of children £60,000 worth of more activity with, you know, the 7 people that are in the building. So there is something about infrastructure as well, intrinsically related to capacity.
I truly believe that. I think it's not that we weren't equipped for it, but perhaps we didn't see the wave of opportunities and creative endeavours coming. And there hasn't, I don't want to, okay. There hasn't been the support for the creative sector in the area over the past few years, over the last few decades, that perhaps would have been necessary to create the kind of infrastructure that's currently needed. So a lot of work is being done by people, by volunteers, by people on a part-time basis, by people doing more than one job at a time, and that is expected to be at the same level of quality and production as some of the larger towns and cities who perhaps have slightly more of a head start. And we're expected to be at that level when we are really trying to define ourselves and our creative sector in a way that is authentic to us as a base, trying to answer the needs of the creatives within our sector and the audiences that we cater for, but also trying to provide a system of wellness and well-being so that we are taking care of ourselves. And it just isn't many plates to spin at the same time, when the truth is we do not have the exact same infrastructure or support behind the scenes as some of the other places we're competing with. That's just a fact, and the downside of that is there are a lot of tired people who are still working and still doing their best, because ultimately we don't want to leave anyone behind, we don't want to miss an opportunity, and we want to create the best and most, what's the word I'm looking for? Just the best creative sector we can all create. So the collaboration levels are amazing, and there are people really supporting each other and going out of their way to build bridges and to hold hands and to be there for that phone call in the middle of the night and when someone's frazzled or worried. And we're doing all these things, and often there is no financial reward for it necessarily, but it's part of the ongoing process and the desire to realise the vision that we have and what we know we are capable of as a sector in this area.
Has anybody else got any thoughts in response?
I'm following the running report. I think, absolutely agree with everything that's just been said. I think there's an important point about integrity and honesty around this. There's people like me who sit as a bureaucrat within a local authority that ultimately in these sorts of things, that I suppose those larger organisations who've got access to potentially larger chunks of money in terms of support and development and how we can maximise those opportunities. I think collectively we need to have an honest conversation about the things that we could and should be doing with that money and what is the best way to bring those together. Obviously there's set parameters around the elements of this, but my philosophy has always been to encourage partnership and collaboration, be a little bit creative in terms of use of public money to maximise those opportunities, and if frankly they're not the right things to be doing, people need to be coming back and saying to everybody, well, yes, this is an opportunity, but it's not quite the right opportunity, or you've made this paperwork too hard, or things like that. And I think it's a tricky conversation to have at times, but we need to have that honest conversation amongst ourselves as a sector to lay those foundations correctly. And but I think more openly, I think my critique is that I think the nature of Lincolnshire and small market towns in the main, it's probably true in lots of places as well, there's a element of being proud about your own individual town or your own community, and frankly if we want to be part of a bigger conversation, we need to come together and talk about the million people plus who live in Greater Lincolnshire, and I need to be shouting about what's happening in Stamford or Boston as much as I should be shouting about what's happening in Grimsby. And I know geographically it's challenging to go 90 minutes down the road at times, and it's a silly request for people to do it all the time. But collectively, if we all advocate for one another and promote what's going off, a great Grimsby is good for Lincoln. A good Lincoln is good for whatever Gainsborough. I'm just trying to name random towns across the whole county now. Probably
that notion of like collective advocacy there,
yeah.
like demanding like a bigger ship rather than a bigger boat, collectively more. I think is something that we're not. I don't think we're particularly good at, and I think that's possibly because what I'm desperately craving is a level of openness, a level of transparency that I think we're not brave enough yet for, in my observation. And I think that, yeah, we need to get to a level of transparency and openness, with money, with resources, with everything, to the point where we can go, okay, so now this is what we're dealing with. We should all then collectively go, we want more, because otherwise you just become sort of people scrabbling for. We don't want to be scrabbling for scraps, right?
no.
Any other thoughts on barriers?
Different? No, I don't think it's got anything different. I think it was kind of the same. I can remember working in Lincolnshire, and I think there has been a shift, certainly in the organisations I work with, but it kind of felt like that everybody was your competitor for funding, for everything, but I do feel there's some organisations and groups that have got more of a, introduced to a word, what's we right now, sort of co-opetition. So we will be competitors, but we will also kind of cooperate on stuff, and I think that's coming through, so actually I'll always want to have a better programme and, get a better, artistic quality score, etc. But actually we will cooperate with Transported in terms of how we could fundraise and share best practice. And I think that's kind of, the barrier for me that we need to have is that, but it's also making sure, like I said, that we do keep connecting, chatting and sort of and collaborating. And we started off during the MPO process with a few of us talking, and I know that doesn't include every element of the sector, but I think if we can make sure we continue to keep talking over the next 3 years, we'll be in a better place in 3 years' time, because we can have these conversations about, like we've been talking about. So in our bid we put some money in around workforce development, but that was kind of aimed at the sort of technical and production area of the sector, but actually somebody else might have something that's aimed at sort of, perform, actors, etc. So it's kind of how do we coordinate that and work it out and share it. And I think that's just by having conversations like this today, but connecting and meeting and working out each other's kind of busy points, and all taking a lead on different areas or different projects at different times depending on people's pressures. So I think if we could overcome the silo working, which is quite easy to fall back into when we're busy, we'll be in a better place.
Yeah, the ease of which you fall back into silo is very. Even like I was driving around the other day and I was like, oh, I really should have spoken to that person about that thing, and you just it's so easy to drop it back into that. It does feel though that the policy, like an element of policy context, is favourable at the minute to us, and we've done well in terms of local investment rounds and things like that across the county, and so there is that moment where we can, because there is a little bit more to play with, and therefore we can play a bit more with others. But how do we do that successfully? And you've spoken a little bit, Matthew, in there about how you've done it successfully. But how do we do it successfully? What are how do we get rid of the barriers around transparency, openness, collaboration, partnership building, time? We don't necessarily have the answers today, but it'd be good to explore that.
Looking at me for an answer.
Well, anybody.
I don't know. I am what you see. I'll always be open and honest with you as much as I can be, and I think that's just what we need. Just to have. I think if you can get a group of people together with similar values, it'll start to develop that kind of culture and and that momentum, and I think hopefully we have. So I guess watch this space, I'm hoping.
So more of this kind of discussion,
Yeah, and conversations and connections, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I was going to say that the intention is there, and as things are changing, as we are working towards building a better infrastructure to support ourselves as agencies and as individuals, I think the willing is there, and so it can be part of the designing process. Going forward, we can say one of our aims is to be as much as possible transparent with each other and to collaborate wherever it is possible. And I think that will lift us out of the old way of thinking, which was there was very little funding and we had to fight for it, and we were each other's competitors. I think we're moving more towards we all have slightly different areas of interest. Is there any way that can become an ecosystem? And we kind of support each other in that way, rather than feeling that if one person gets it, that means I won't have it.
Yeah.
So it becomes a very limited pie.
Yeah.
It can be an infinite pie. And I think that's something that intention, the power of intention can create going forward.
Yeah.
There's no answer today, but further down the line, with it being everyone's desire, I think it will come to fruition.
And would be.
So I feel like I've lost it now, but I've just been thinking for a while. So I worked for Love nearly 10 years ago. I grew up in Netherlands, in Lincoln. It's one of the best jobs I've ever done, project working for Love. And I just want to say there's so much that's been built up, I think, in Lincolnshire, for a long time. And something that I'm from the visual arts sector now. I work in the visual arts sector, so I don't live in Lincoln anymore, but I've been looking at projects like Mansions of the Future, which looks amazing. My friend Kerry works on that, who I met at college, and I just wonder what the legacy of that is. And I think also, the pandemic taught a lot of funders that actually, like you said, often we can get project funding, but we can't fund people, and we need the people, we need the capacity to do this work, and that's really important. I think what you said about the sector working at a ridiculous pace is sector-wide issue. Like, it's not just in Lincolnshire. And we all said during the pandemic we're going to slow down. We've not slowed down. I think we just sped up again with the MPA round and stuff like that. But I think we have an ability to advocate to funders for what we need, and that's not just more project funding. That's about long-term sort of embedded engagement with communities like in East Lincolnshire, around here to kind of to do the work. I mean, it's amazing that Esmond Fairburn and Paul Hamlin funded this for so long, because you just don't get that in other parts of the country. But I think what we can do together is advocate and tell funders what we need, and actually that's more time, that's people, and it's not just going from project bid to project bid to project bid. That's what it's...
And do you have a sense of that collective advocacy? Do you have a sense of what shape that should take, or how that looks?
It's hard because I think people are scared of speaking out because they don't want to, bite the hand that feeds them.
Yeah.
But actually, we all know this is a problem. We all know it's a problem. And then within the pandemic, funders were suddenly saying, we will cover your core costs. You don't have to kind of create a new project. So, I think there needs to be, I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah.
But I think, like you said, we need to be braver to sort of have these conversations with the people actually delivering the work.
Yeah.
In relation to sort of grant, advisors or whatever.
Yeah. And I think it's really hard to advocate to funders when the whole context of the country and the environment is so challenged. But I heard recently there was a thing going around online that the entire Arts Council budget is smaller or similar to one significant London hospital, and of course we're not going to compete. We're not in the nature of competing with healthcare, but like imagine the transformation that would one London hospital worth of investment in the country, and imagine the impact that would have. We're going to come to Rachel, but just before we do, Rachel, I'm just going to remind people that now that we're moving into the more discursive moment, we have the live stream, so we have to be loud. So please use your diaphragm. Thank you.
My specialist subject. I think that shift is possible. I've been playing the Arts Council game for a very, very, very long time. Back in the days, we used to just write them a nice letter, say, "Dear Arts Council, we'd like to do this," and they'd go, "Yes, here's infinite resources." For a long time, we all knew, talking about 10, 15 years ago, we knew that Arts Council wouldn't fund administration. They wouldn't fund any administration or any tasks around it. It was all absolutely about materials, moments, resources. There was no administrative function. You used to bury your admin really deep in your budgets. You'd call it something else. You'd call it evaluation. You'd call it production. You'd call it liaison costs. Absolute, you'd call it anything to bury and hide that need that you're actually asking for just the time and the people and the money to do the thing. And since then, and I teach Arts Council, and I imagine that a beautifully transparent process that actually has to be taught in school. I teach Arts Council to students with some success so far, touch wood. I have seen over the few years that I've been applying, since I've applied consistently for years now. They now include, administration's allowed to be in there. They are asking you how you are costing this and what are your fair wages and are you paying your people. All of those questions, that was the stuff you used to hide. So something has transformed, something has shifted there because they now demand that of you. They now demand that you are environmentally aware and that you answer to that investment principle around environmental awareness. So shifts and changes in this stuff is possible, and if that kind of advocacy that you're talking about and that speaking truth to power, these things have shifted over time. There is a possibility for it. I absolutely think you're right that we have to say these things and say them publicly and not be afraid to put extra time into our applications and extra people and to ask for what things are worth, because if we collectively do that, then struggle together and all that.
I have a question about in that collective advocacy. It feels like we've really mastered the art of the economic impact of the arts, cultural regeneration of place and space. There's all those figures about how much the creative arts brings into the economy.
Every pound you
every extract. So it feels like we've kind of mastered that. But it almost feels like to go one step further, we need to kind of have that same level of mastery and wizardry of the argument into the other areas of the transformational impact of the arts in terms of social cohesion, mental health and well-being, all of those other that we all recognise as people that see the transformative benefits, experience every day. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Thanks, Ben. This is great. So I think to get together and talk. So I work as the business creative in business and generally with creative organisations or individuals. And I recognise there's a seismic shift across the country, perhaps, but definitely in the county, around the relationship of the creatives with the business sector. So, for example, when I redeveloped the new Theatre Royal, 50% of my work was out there, talking to people, engaging in partners and acting as an ambassador for the building, just to connect to that business conversation. I would argue that 50% of the business landscape had no idea why I wanted to chat to them as a theatre business development manager, but the other 50% did. And the 50% that did is an exciting group because they recognise the benefits of arts and culture to place and the benefits in relation to driving investment, retaining and recruiting staff. Because if you've got a strong cultural culture, people want to move here. It's not necessarily just about the salary, it's about what you do in the evenings and weekends and how cool the streets when you walk around and how fun does it feel. So I think this is out there, and I think as a creative sector, there isn't enough of a network of getting together
great because, yeah, you're right. We could lean in much more than we do. We've been exploring, you know, the nature of show business, what that means, and how we could engage our business colleagues in the art of show business, even though maybe we don't potentially vibe with show business, like as an organisation, but we definitely can lean into the art of show business and what that means for us, particularly around sort of development, our development plans. And we've definitely been exploring that, and yeah, to hear you say it's quite feels good, feels positive. Any other thoughts on that? Yeah, and then we're going to go to you, sir, and then we're going to go over here.
Okay. I'm as grassroots as it gets.
Please make sure we...
Okay, I'm as grassroots as it gets. I've started off the studio from scratch, and you're talking about barriers. I'd love to actually hit a barrier because I can't even get my local council to respond to me by email or telephone. I cannot get the local library to put on an event, even when I can provably show them that it would generate funds for them. So you're talking about barriers. If you can't even talk to somebody, you can't even hit that barrier.
And can I ask, if you don't mind, sharing what council that is?
SDKC.
Okay.
Or SKDC, sorry.
Okay, I mean, lack of communication is a barrier, right? So, and I think we have lots of nods across the room, so I'm sure that you're not alone in that. Has anybody got any thoughts?
I think that does. I don't work for a council. But I think that comes back to capacity, because I don't think people would be willfully ignoring you.
That's just not just the council, that's across the board where I am in Grantham. There is...
I'm from Grantham. What studio are you from? Who are you? SKDC, hello. Guildhall Arts I'm behind you.
I literally went into the Guildhall Arts Centre, introduced myself as an artist.
Sorry, just looking at your name.
Yeah. And basically, in the Guildhall Arts Centre, you do theatre and music. Yeah. There is a wall by the cafe that you offer as exhibition space. Yeah. And I know that you have a room at the back of the Guildhall that is offered as exhibition space. That space has maybe 8 or 9 doors that break up all the walls. Yeah. It's not supervised, and it's at the back of the building. It's no good. And it's expensive if we want to hire the rooms upstairs. And when I asked about finding studio space, sorry, we don't know anything about that, off you go. So I found it, although you're good with music and play, as an artist and a maker, not very.
Yeah, I know we did recommend one guy to a studio, but Grantham as a whole in terms of artistic studio space, unless anyone else knows anything different, but that's where I'm based. It is something that we've discussed before about the visual arts in Grantham, and whereas in Stamford there's a lot of room for that, Grantham in terms of visual art, we know that that's an area that's lacking, and exactly where are the walls, where is the space to do that? Because as you say, even the space in our building is not entirely appropriate for it and doesn't tick all the boxes that it needs to tick.
I also asked you if you could point me in the direction of someone that could help me in the council. Didn't know any names, couldn't point me to anybody.
Probably not for a studio space, no.
Well, not as a studio space. I mean, I've managed to open my studio. Mm-hmm. I've sourced materials, I've sourced equipment. Yep. I'm now giving introductions to students for work experience. I'm working with people, artists that have got social problems, a whole wealth of things, but I can't even get the council to pick up the phone.
So I suppose the thing is knowing who to speak to and the place to speak to, because I'm still not sure what you want from the council at this moment. Do you see what I mean? Well, it's probably knowing who we need to speak to get what we want, because in the 4 walls of our building, if you want a big studio space, unfortunately it's just something that we don't have.
It's not what I was after. I went and set mine up.
I think
Yeah.
that comes back to clarity and transparency and making sure that we have a level of clarity as to who to communicate with. I know that we've been doing something that came out of the Future Arts Centre for us was that there was a complete lack of transparency and clarity as to how the things that got on our stages ended up there. And so what we did was created the Open to Ideas process and made sure that there was a process that informed what we were doing, and it's not perfect and it never will be, but it is there and it's a process. And what's great about today is that you have expressed a view, and then Jade behind you is from the council have opened her arms to that, and I think that that's brilliant. So this space is working, and that's really nice, but it goes back to that point of having more and more of the need for these spaces, because we've got people from local authorities in the room, we've got venues, we've got organisations, and I think that if we can communicate air views, air barriers, air opportunities in a way that's collaborative and progressive and positive, I think that's all for the better. So really, actually, quite an exciting exchange.
Yeah, just off. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to come in here as a council employee elsewhere. I've previously spent quite a lot of time working for Hull City of Culture. Trust is a massive arts organisation at the time, and I think what Hull City Council did very well. If City of Culture Hall was an absolute load of rubbish, they would have said it's City of Culture Trust's fault. It's diabolical. If it was great, and it was great, everyone was in that together. So I think there's a really interesting juxtaposition in local authority thought process about the role of the creative sector, and I think a lot of people in different roles in the council, all councils were large organisations with different people, different thought processes. So I've come from an organisation where 100% of people in the organisation get the art, get what's going off. I'll just give an example of something that's a conversation that I was having earlier this week. Kind of a conversation about car parking charges and all those sorts of things. Yes, we might lose a few quid in terms of car parking fees if an event's taking place, but if thousands of people in the town centre spending money, that's got a wider impact. However, if you're in car parking and your exclusive role in the world is to maximise car parking revenue, and you're not used to that art space, you've got to kind of collectively recognise, and I've had to go on a journey itself and going, well, this is good, and I know it's good, however that needs to be explained in terms of the greater impact as well. So when we're talking about conversations, yes, there needs to be a creative conversation, but equally there are hearts and minds to be won within the public sector at large, there are hearts and minds to be won in the business sector as well. And again, I think that again comes back to that point about positive advocacy, because if someone sees something great happening in Epworth, I'm just going to keep naming random towns across Greater Lincolnshire to do when I run out of steam. They might have seen something great happening in Market Depot. No, I'm just trying to scattergun around the county. I'm going to local authority area.
I'm going to come over here to pick up somebody that wants to speak.
Oh, you're
Sure.
me.
Sure.
Yeah, come on.
Okay, I hope this is an appropriate question. I'm a musician, an independent musician, and I've been working like that since I was 18. I work professionally. I've also been on and off skint since I was 18. As you can imagine, I don't know anything about Arts Council funding, but there's lots of people in here who have access to these wonderful pots of money from the Arts Council. And I'm sure there's lots of other creatives in here as well. As creatives, as a creative, how can you help me, and how can I access that help?
It's a great question, and I think it comes, well, I mean, I'll kick off as somebody that is manages an organisation in receipt of Arts Council funding, and I think that it comes down to creating schemes and processes that enable transparency and advocacy so that people can come through. So, for example, that we're not utilising the money, squirreling it away, and then not being clear about how we're spending it, because it is, the public funds. and there's a real responsibility. I think everybody collectively has a real responsibility when they manage public funds, not just because they have to report on it, because they genuinely feel a sense of responsibility to do great work with it. So, for example, at the Arts Centre, collectively with the Barbican as part of the University of Lincoln, a significant amount of our Arts Council NPO funding, I think there's less than 18% goes back to us. The rest of it is direct funding straight to artists. Yeah. So it's a significant amount. And the way that we do that is that we will be establishing open calls for various things. So we've designed a system. So we've got associate and resident artists that will be starting very soon, and the call-outs will be going out over the summer. It's genuinely really exciting. You know, we're investing £70,000 in our associate scheme over 3 years. Yeah. So significant commissions, and no more scraping around. 20 grand minimum commission a year to make something. We're also looking at how we support those people that are early career. So we're looking at our resident artist scheme, which is again seed commissions of £2.5 grand. And not just that, equipping people with business and entrepreneurial skills to make that happen as well. Because in Lincoln, I think that you also need to be able to be an artist entrepreneur in order to make the work happen, going back to the business stuff, which is really important. And I think that if we're developing resident artists, for example, that they will be equipped with a business plan, and they will get a fundraising plan, and they will get template budgets, and we will equip them with all those things. So that you can do the Arts Council bids, so that collectively we have way more Arts Council funding bids going in that are high quality and therefore more likely to be successful, therefore greater investment. I think this is off the top of my head, that I think that comparative to Nottinghamshire and to Derbyshire, they receive £1.20 or something in the region of that per head, and we receive less than £1. And that's predominantly because there's not enough project-funded applications going in. So if you put all of them together. Sally, you had a point.
Yeah, one thing I was just going to say, from the Barbican side, I'm the new director of the Barbican, so it's very much about supporting sector development, skills, business skills is where I come from as a background. I think for me, from earlier conversations, as somebody coming into the space, for me it's all been about, well, the biggest observation I've had is the lack of advocacy and presence as a region. And Lincolnshire has got some challenges of its own because of that geographical spread. And also as well, when you look at somewhere like London, Manchester, you've got the mayors that support, you've got a real big understanding of what the arts and what the creative sector offers. So I think it's a really important role of those who, at all levels, that we are trying to really say the value of the sector and what it is and what's unique about Lincolnshire, what it can really do, those game-changing exercises, but also as well that sort of coming together, because actually it's common practice elsewhere to share and work and advocate. And I know when there's small pots going around, sometimes it does make you want to grasp what you've got and not share. So it's really good to see things like that. And I'm going to do a bit of a mic drop because I've got to go and have a meeting with the co-op. So sorry about that. But yeah, I think that's for me from an outsider, and I look forward to talking to you about what you do.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. sorry about the mic drop.
Yes, I've got a different perspective coming from a school background.
Yes.
You need to go into schools and tell people they can get work in the arts sector. If people don't know, unless it's changed, the national curriculum doesn't give any credit for creativity. All the subjects, art, music, drama, dance, D&T, do not get credits in school, in what's called something 8 or whatever. That means I think we should, there are certain schools, William Farr for example, that carried on offering those subjects on the curriculum, whereas other schools didn't, because they weren't getting any credit for it. It's very hard work for lots of art teachers in school, because the parents say, well, what can you do with art? What can you do with music? People need to go into schools and say, this is what you can do with art, this is what you can do with music, this is what you can do with dance. You mentioned dance. I mean, there's a professional dance family in Grimsby, aren't there? Loads of actors have come out of Grimsby as well. I know it, etc. Another agency that produces musicians is the Cathedral. I mean, William Farr has some choristers, lots of the state schools have choristers now. It's not just the private sector. They train singers, and at the same time they train musicians. And then when these people go somewhere else, they invite them back for the concerts that they have at the Cathedral. I mean, there's loads going on in schools. There's loads of creativity in schools, for which hard-working teachers get very little credit. That's what I'd like to say.
Great, thank you for your contribution. Any questions? Okay, we're going to go straight to the person behind, and then we're going to come to you, sir, in the jacket. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. I kind of wanted to come at it as a kind of another sort of as an independent artist. I'm a designer and illustrator. Yeah. I graduated from Lincoln when it was De Montfort Uni here, and then I was in the final year. All of my colleagues, all of my peers, all my people I studied with left Lincoln because there wasn't anything. There was very little here, very little people knew about. I stayed in Lincoln because I loved it, and I still do, and I was determined to work in whatever creative industry that I could here and have a business, and now I'm a full-time freelance illustrator. But I know, I don't know if there's any other sort of creatives here, this might be similar to what you were mentioning, but I know so many other creatives and artists who it almost feels kind of like we're outside of knowing the information about things that are happening, like loads of things that you just mentioned, and I was like, oh, these sound amazing, like all these different kind of things that could help, whether it's not just funding, but in terms of like, I've had to learn how to run my own business, sort of, you know, it's not meaning there isn't the support there, but I think there's almost this kind of, there needs to bridge that gap. And there's so many people that would find it really useful, and it's almost like we're kind of on the outside of how do we find out about all this that's, you know, obviously there's so much going on sort of within Lincolnshire, and kind of how to bridge that gap.
And I guess that was the inspiration for this. It's about, there is quite a lot going on at the minute because of there's some alignment happening and some new investment, and there's lots of plans being made. And it's like, how do you get, like we could talk about them every day and still somebody wouldn't know about them, and it's like, we must keep constantly talking about them, and not just when they're finished and packaged, but also when we're in their development. And that's something that I think that that's harder to do, right? So I try and talk a lot about the kind of plans that we have, and I'm sure that other people do the same, is that trying to talk about plans and not just talk about when they're ready. Like, here's the finished call out that you could apply for, but talking about plans so that people are kind of going on that journey with you. But it's really hard, isn't it? But I totally hear that. It's a really valid point. I'm going to come to you in the beige jacket.
Sure.
You've had your hand up for a while.
Really interesting discussion, and two things strike me, and with the greatest respect, and I'm including myself in all this. This is art speak. We do it very well, and many of us can translate that into what the Arts Council and other funders want to hear, but you have to have a working knowledge of art speak. And what I think is the big elephant in the room that nobody's mentioned yet is Grantium, which is not fit for purpose. Beyond not fit for purpose. I've said this to people at the Arts Council and they mutely agree, but we work with what we have. Now,
just to be clear, Grantium, for anybody that doesn't know, is the application form that you apply to Arts Council.
Now, Sam over there, I know very well, and if I hadn't said this in the past, come and talk. I will help you through it. But sorry, he is. No, we work together. The thing is that, you know, Grantium, you're talking about barriers. My word, is that a barrier? And it's not just a barrier to people like me who are relatively eloquent. I can do art speak. It takes me 3 weeks to write a bid. I mean, we do quite well, but in the end, I bring a whole bunch of people in, we refine, we go back to let's create, we look at things, we do all the things we're supposed to do, and actually we're quite successful. But it's very hard if you're an artist of any complexion, genre, or practice, working on your own, to sit down in front of Grantium, and if you want the lowest level of support, which is DYCP, then develop your own creative practice, then it is very, very hard to do. you've got to be sure you're ticking the boxes. If you don't know what the boxes are, because for whatever reason you've not read the right bits and pieces and don't do art speak, you have another problem. And that's usually compounded with creatives, because most of my family are creatives, and that is because most of my family are dyslexic. And trying to fill out Grantium if you're dyslexic, oh my God. And you talk about barriers. I know an awful lot of artists, graphic artists, musicians, sculptors. I know a couple of illustrators. Dyslexia is very much there. It's one of the key indicators of the creative industry. People tend to be dyslexic. So I think you talk about barriers, yes, Grantium, get it fixed and find a better way that emerging artists and artists at an everyday practical level can access it in a meaningful way, because at the moment they can't.
Thank you. And just to say as well, touching on that point around access, and I don't think it's particularly well advertised, but you can actually get an access support worker to work with you. Arts Council will pay for somebody to work with you on your application. So if there is anybody in the room that's thinking, oh my God, that's me, and I'm never going to be able to do it, there is support there, and you can get an access support worker, and that's something that I didn't know, and it's not particularly well advertised. I think they've got much better at advertising it, and it's better, but yeah, it's something. I'm just conscious that there's 20 minutes left, and we haven't heard from the online contingent in the room, and there might be quite a few. Kaylee, no? Okay, fine. They're all chilling.
Can I just say, when you get all this sorted out, I'm just a punter, can you please advertise what's on in Lincoln? Because all my friends say, how do we find out what's on?
We have our newsletter that you can sign up to.
Well, I've done that, obviously with Lincoln Arts Society, Lincoln Arts, but I mean, it's still finding the whole thing collected, what's on.
Kind of jumping onto that, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
Also, a bit of a promo is that working with Colin, we own a new venue locally. But as part of that, we're included in, and I hope you don't mind me mentioning, Ben, there's a local group called Lincoln Cultural Collective, and that's just a collection of people like all of us in the room that get together, very much like this, that come and tell us what you're doing, how can we, because so many people are so frustrated, and it's a way of saying, okay, well, let's support each other's project and let's see how we can promote it. But talking about the marketing side of what you do, just from projects that I've run in the past, in my freelance hat, but also my day job running Southside, you can do radio, you can do print, you can do your social media, your newsletters, your posters, your flyers, and it still doesn't get to everybody. So I totally respect that's annoying, because I'm also a customer and a punter, but and I don't even think there's an answer to this. It's just saying, we do everything.
There used to be something called Love Lincoln years ago, and you used to be able to put stuff on there, didn't you?
So I'm joining today from Visit Lincoln. So haven't got an arts background, but we're actively involved in working in promotion. It's interesting. The structures for delivery across tourism, and obviously people in this room are very similar. We share DCMS as kind of the government body. But just going back to your point, I think there is a need, and I sit here as a destination marketing person thinking, we talk about audience development, I talk about target visitors, and actually I think the comment that you were saying earlier about in a visitor economy, we all share visitors. We don't have one exclusive visitor who just comes to our shop and then leaves Lincoln or leaves the housing. And I think that, coming here today and talking to, we have 200 partners that work with us through Visit Lincoln, we run the website, we work with hoteliers and all the rest of it. I think a huge part of this is almost like developing the destination and realising that we all have a common audience or a common visitor. And actually when we're talking to these people, we need to talk with one voice and not talk about individual events or individual programmes, individual campaigns. It needs to be kind of a narrative that attracts attention. But I look at that from more of a regional, national point of view. So how do we get footfall into Lincoln?
I was going to say, so it's not just about the visitor, it's about, there's a lot of us already here.
Absolutely.
And how do we know about the gig going on down the street? So there's lots of things to do, like, businesses could start saying yes to putting posts, there's all sorts, It's about those of us that want to go to stuff and we don't know about it.
But the magazine was a project-funded piece of work that was funded by a Start-Stop project grant. So that's why it was here and why it's not anymore.
Right.
Jane, you have had your hand up
Yes.
for such a long time. Thank you for being
I'm
patient.
Jane, most people here know me. So I'm one of these actors from Grimsby. So I'm ticking all the boxes there. So yeah, I'm a freelance performer and also run my own company, Barnett Theatre. I think that what you talked about, Tanya, which was amazing about the capacity, I think that's so important. I think it's important in the independent sector as well as it is in the venues. And I think also that kind of like you say, Matthew, about like the I can't remember what word you used, the whatever it was, competitors. Whatever the word was that you said. Co-opetition. I think one thing that would be great for me as someone who runs a company and someone who works here as an independent, I know that I have conversations with people a lot. I've been away on a tour, so I'm a bit out of the loop. But you know, a lot of people here have received MPO funding, but I haven't. People have told me like face to face kind of what their funding was for. But I haven't seen anywhere where people have actually said, this is what we've got the money to do, and this is what over the next 3 years we're going to do. Because for the independent sector as well, it would be great for us to know kind of what you've got coming up, because we might be able to fit in with that. And like, I've got projects that I'd like to do, and I'm already hearing people saying similar things about like working with schools. And I'm like, oh great, I've seen things recently this week, I thought, oh, they're doing that already, great, I don't need to cover that. You know, so it's all, you might have something that you're coming up that you're working absolutely max at capacity for. It turns out that someone else down the road is wanting to do a similar thing, and you could just bring them in as an artist. They've already got a bit of money to do it, and they can help you complete that section of your aim for what you're doing. So it would be great, even if it's something like saying at the top when you get the MPO funding, this is the rough strategy we've got for the next few years. Like Ben at Lincoln Arts Centre recently did, videos of what came out of what's
Yeah, I think it's so
Sounds
important.
also like you need a site where people can register an interest.
Or even like an email newsletter that just tells us what you've got coming up in the next few years, or like what you've got coming up brand-wise. It's like you said, Ben, about not just saying this is the final call for the application, it's saying like, because then we can put in place, you know, if we say then ask for an Arts Council grant that's going to cover our costs for the next year, you know, then we can also put in place those things for Wesley, we can put in those partnerships. You know, so it's just kind of like that slightly joined up thinking that might be something as easy as an email newsletter that just tells us. I know that's capacity to do that.
And I think that's why it's not been done so far. But it's on the to-do list, because I know at times perhaps somebody like you or Lucy come to me with ideas, and I'm a bit like, don't quite kind of meet what I wanted, but actually if I've communicated what it is to start, kind of a plan is to start with, you can develop your ideas to fit in more with what we're doing, if that makes sense.
And also because when we've had, like, for example, recently the new MPO funding coming in, I'm now having to think, okay, well, I used to go to, for example, that theatre for those little bits of funding. They've now been cut, but the district council there has now got money, so I'm going to have to pivot and try and make contacts with them. So it's kind of like you're kind of constantly having to switch and change as an independent to kind of think, right, well, now I've got to be ticking these boxes instead. And actually it might not be a big pivot, but it just helps us to, again, keep it all running, basically.
Yeah, I just couldn't agree more, and I think that is something that I think anybody with who is managing funding can take away and should be doing. And it's sometimes a little bit hard to do, because sometimes your plans evolve and you don't know, and you don't want to say you're going to do something and then not deliver, and then damage trust.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit like you've got a plan, but then we've also got to still fundraise for some of the stuff that we do want to do, so don't want to make promises as well, so it's a balance. But yeah, it is on the to-do list to sort of
such a good point. Yeah, and I think that what I found is that sometimes having unformed plans and having an open conversation about them helps you develop the plan. And I've been really informed by that. So, you know, when the Future Arts Centre was a good example, but also just, you know, even silly things like doing Instagram chats about it, and then somebody messages me and says, oh, I saw that and we've got a similar thing and we should probably talk because we don't want to do the same thing. Yeah, I can't agree enough. Simon.
Yeah, just a sort of general, I guess, positive point that, like, for all of the frustrations, to me, they all boil down to a kind of, I think everybody in this room has found this useful for a number of different reasons, depending on where you're coming from. And it just says to me, we need to do more of this, not necessarily sitting in rows with a panel, good though it is, but we also need to find other ways. And there's, if those who've been around a little longer, I mean, the whole Lincolnshire One Venues project ironically started for exactly the same reason. And this is not like a new idea about, let's get together and we can, like, maybe it would help. Obviously, that's always been there and it is for everywhere. And these things tend to be cyclical and there's a new idea and I've certainly been involved in several, and there was a mash-up thing we used to do. The mash-up still exists, but that started as a kind of a monthly session where, you know, Lincoln specific, let's get together, and that was useful for a while, and then it started to run out of steam, because these things do, because all good ideas need shifting. But for me, my sort of main takeaway from this is that actually there's loads of energy, there's loads of possibilities, loads of opportunity, but there are some gaps in knowledge, and there are some gaps in links, and this sort of thing, and whether it can be much more informal, but keeping it going and keeping people talking to each other and finding out about things is vital and relatively easy and can be fun. Excellent. I'm sorry, and never go across your own round of applause. But also just Emma's point about kind of business gatherings, and you know, we all know, you know, there's no sort of, I used to go to, when I was at Dribble, a monthly one at 7 o'clock on a Friday morning, and to start with I was like, oh, I'm not sure, you know, it's a nice bacon butty, but actually it became incredibly useful, and I learned also to speak in a different way, to stop with the arts crap, bullshit, you know, and actually, because nobody knew what I meant, and that was a really useful way in to just speaking in a different language, in fact.
The other exciting piece is that business is looking for creativity. They need innovation and they need a creative person to come often and have a look and find solutions. So, you know, there's a chasm there that flows.
We're going to go to Rachel and then person in the first top.
I just wanted to join up this thinking about business, and also what was mentioned earlier around getting better at evidencing our value in ways that aren't about, for every pound that goes in we produce 8 or whatever the current stat is. I'm currently working on a project with Lincolnshire Primary NHS Healthcare Trust, I think Federation Trust, they've got a terrible acronym, but they are building the new Peter Hodgkinson Centre up at County Hospital, and I've just had photos through, there's some artworks being installed there, a part of a project that I've done with BA Fine Art students, with current patients of that facility, and with the occupational therapy teams up at the NHS. And we have done this project for the kind of good and well-being of everybody, and it's been about the process, not just the artworks, but they're being installed today, and it's having a big gala opening next Thursday. What the upshot of this work has been is that actually the NHS are finding ways to evidence the value of the project, not in terms of money. There's been no cash in this, we've been scrimping and saving and doing everything we can to make it happen, but now it has happened. They are looking at a kind of social value engine and a bit of software that's helping to put figures against, to avoid that kind of art speak and to talk in terms that business leaders and other organisations understand. They are putting costs against things like recovery time and occupational therapeutic benefit and skills acquisition and community cohesion and all of this kind of stuff. And that is now being put into a business case to enable them to put that kind of creative work into the designs and the makings of new wards and new buildings in the future. And they're sort of teaching from business and from their NHS perspective, they're teaching me in the cultural sector all sorts of stuff about how to evidence value that I sort of knew, but hadn't quite put the costs against it and seen quite the sum total of what the power of what we can do might mean to other organisations and other businesses. So I guess I just wanted to give my support to this idea of leaning into kind of business creativity and to thinking about ways that we can shout about what we do that aren't Arts Council related, that aren't, and I say this as a teacher of Arts Council, but that aren't always about that cold hard cash, are actually about community cohesion, about well-being, about creativity.
Mm-hmm. forever. I'm going to go to Bruce.
Yep. Yeah, my name's Bruce. I'm from Spilsby Sessions House in East Lindsey. We've got several big funded projects going on. So there's a capital project that's 4.9 million investment from levelling up to restore Spilsby Sessions House and create a new or revived, a regenerated venue there. But we've also just received £240,000 worth of UK shared prosperity funding. And I've heard lots of talk about Arts Council today, and not very much talk about what other funders are available. So, and I think that's a thing that we as a sector need to be more aware of. In terms of promotion, you were talking about promotion, there is an organisation called Destination Lincolnshire, which has been quite involved at the beginning of what I've been doing. And that's you were there, hello. And they are looking at all of Lincolnshire, and I think over the years as they develop, there'll be much more of a gathering of everything. I think one of the things I've been conscious of as a freelancer who's worked in freelance for many years, is making sure that those of us that are doing these projects embed into what we're doing, creating enough freelance opportunities. Freelancers can only survive if there is enough work throughout the year, and it's those of us with the different projects creating plenty of freelance opportunities and bits of work that people can do, which answers some of those issues. And it's not that really that, yes, the Arts Council wants small project grants from this area, but a lot of us can help support that. And also we can save you the problem, hopefully, of having to do any of that typing and create more smaller scale work, smaller scale development work. Because it is that bridge, we have to work in community and then realise that as those communities, as people kind of get to a certain age, they want, some of them just love and do it for joy, but others want to take those steps, as I think you were saying earlier. It's understanding how we can make those gaps, so we can join up those dots and give people those opportunities. And I think that's really relevant. And these conversations are absolutely crucial in making that happen. So,
Thanks, Bruce. Thank you for those thoughts. So we need to wrap up because we've got 5 minutes left, and the next session that's in here is a spotlight on afternoon tea edition, where 3 artists, is it? 3 artists are going to be sharing their practice. 20 slides, 20 seconds. 3, 4? 3. 4, maybe 4, maybe 3. So if you are interested in that, you should definitely stick around. And if you want to carry on the conversation, I would just encourage you to carry it on downstairs in the cafe so that we can get this space cleared so that people can have the time to set up that they need.
What time back in here, Ben?
Sorry?
What time back in here?
It's 12:30.
It's not 12:30.
So 4 minutes.
I
just want to say, before we all dash off, I just want to say thank you to the panel It's so hard to get time, carve out time to do it, and I'm just like amazed that anybody turns up, quite frankly. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I wanted to give a look. So those of you that have enjoyed today's live talk, so obviously I've said Soap Festival's happening the 16th, 17th, 18th of June. But on the 17th in Skegness, we've got a talks programme of our own for the day. So we've got Paul Gustav from the Arts Council coming in, we've got a couple of colleagues from Denmark, Sweden and Austria holding and hosting different talks. We've got some talks on culture development and sort of place change, culture and health, Women in Culture Action Forum to look into development, lots of different networking opportunities, events as well. So you can like today, hopefully see it. It's on this Saturday, the 17th, and they vary between 10 and 5.
Great. And then obviously stick around today and stick around tomorrow. Kaylee, you need to talk because I can't do that.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you want to see some great collaboration, we have from silence into song tonight. So that is a laryngectomy choir, so it's a choir of people who have lost their voice boxes and learnt to sing after losing their voice boxes. And they're singing with the sounds of trees from Hiroshima and Nagasaki who survived nuclear bombs. So you've got nuclear that has saved these people's lives, so chemotherapy, and also nuclear that these trees have survived. Coming together, it's going to be incredible. So
they were rehearsing last night, it was.
Yeah, we've got some tickets left, so definitely go downstairs and book them, please. Thank you.